Hello, and welcome to Returning to Base, a Mechwarrior Living Legends podcast. Today's subject is pub etiquette. Today I have 4 guests. My guests are Architect.
I am Clean Smoke Jaguar. I've been playing for a while, and I like to think I'm pretty good.
And Koume.
Hello, I've played this game for almost 10 years.
And Dead Salmon.
Clan Jade Falcon, technically not the most junior Falcon. Played for about a year and a half.
And Direwolf.
Hello, I am Direwolf, another member of Clan Jade Falcon, somewhere in the middle of the pack in seniority, and I've been playing for approximately 2.5 years.
Wonderful. All right, so pub etiquette. I've noticed that we've got all these pub games going, and there are some norms that sort of have shown up over the years that people do certain things and don't do other things, even when it's not a written rule. Although sometimes it is a written rule. And I thought we'd go through some of those. Anybody have one off the top of their head they want to talk about?
Well, a current one or one from the olden days?
Oh, feel free to choose either.
Okay, because I was not around for them, but I mostly know, I'll say this straight up, I don't have very much, I don't have a very high opinion of, pub etiquette as a principle, because what I'm most familiar with is, the idea of there being fairly arbitrary rules. The one that I was thinking of right now was, apparently Huntress in, way before my time, which was the old SJ servers, forbade legging. And they would also forbid things like, I think, running into people with the aerospace or whatever, which is,
Right.
I mean, it just seems like something that isn't really effective, or ever really something. I mean, I understand that Battles was significantly different then, but even then, it was you weren't really accomplishing much by spending a ton of time constantly legging people or whatever. So banning it just seems pointless.
I mean, legging is incredibly rude.
Yeah, but you're also gimping yourself, so.
To an extent.
I like to think that was another era, an era where there was LBX 40 ASF with the maneuverability of Sparrowhawk, to where legging was on the menu more often, and could have been a lot shittier than these days, when legging is tactically inadvantageous unless you're playing some big brain mind games.
And I think that's exactly the point, is that legging is tactically advantageous. So if you're doing it to spite somebody. There's no reason to leg somebody for a tactical advantage.
There is, absolutely. If you happen to accidentally hit somebody in the leg, are you just going to be well, I'm going to sacrifice all this damage?
No.
Yeah, so it just seems kind of silly and artificial. At present, I just don't feel like there are that many pub etiquette rules other than don't flame your teammates. It's just be a nice person.
Is that a rule though?
People. I mean, actually, I would say that is probably one of the few written rules of pub etiquette, because you will get banned from 12th if you are a flaming expletive. So,
that's news to me.
oh boy,
What do you mean,
done? Believe me.
Shooting with flamethrowers, or do you mean with
no,
in the chat?
being a horrible individual.
Flamethrowers.
No, I mean, no. When I say don't be a horrible individual, that's what I mean. That's the only thing that's written down. That doesn't even really I don't think that's really pub etiquette as human etiquette.
Yeah.
And I mean, the enforcement on that is not.
Well, that's
the
what we're here to
strongest.
discuss, the unwritten rules, because anyone can look at the written rules and say, oh, that's what's going on. Some of the unwritten rules, there's flying with ping 5,000, which is not an exaggeration. The other week we had an Australian player who joined with a solid 5,000 ping, which, if my math is correct, ping is measured in milliseconds, right?
Yes.
So 5,000, isn't that is that either 5 seconds or a half second?
I believe that would be on
5 seconds.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
I mean, the written recommended limit is 200.
There is actually a written rule for that as well, which is okay, don't fly aerospace over 200 ping, I think it is.
And I
Or
mean,
if
if
you're
you're
warping.
below 200 ping and you know you're rubber banding,
Yeah,
you shouldn't.
because of UDP routing being really weird. Occasionally people are warping and they won't always know it. But yeah. Also a bit of like an edge case where it's kind of more, it's more along the lines of like the game is literally unplayable for people or for the people who are trying to play against you, but that is very like, I don't know if that really counts as etiquette versus like here's something that just completely breaks the whole game, like on a mechanical level.
I know that when
well,
I'm
not
flying-
abusing
really know what to do.
mechanics or mechanics breaking down. I think that fall under etiquette, because if you want to be an unpleasant player and not have fun and make other people not have fun, there's a lot of options at your disposal, given the jank that's built into this game.
I know that when I'm flying, I pretty regularly, like before I take my plane out in the first place, I check my ping. And then once I start flying, after I get a kill and fly up to a safe altitude again, I might check my ping again. Especially if like I'm doing really, really well and have taken no return fire, I check my ping.
If it's suspicious how little return fire you're taking, it's a definite possibility that that's the reason.
Yeah, it's probably just you got a pub of newbies. Who knows?
I mean, good ASF players can dive into a battle and not take much damage.
All I got to do to check my ping though is just hit tab for like a second, and so
Yeah, it's one button away. That's not a bad idea.
You were speaking, Direwolf, about some of the older rules. There were a couple older rules I remembered. One was, besides no legging, there was also a rule about when you were allowed to use aircraft at all. They actually had I think it was 420 ME, who was formerly one of the community managers for Wandering Samurai, had this rule that you would only ever take an aircraft if there were at least 6 players on the other team.
Yeah. I can remember this one.
That's an interesting one. Yeah.
It makes sense, I think.
I mean,
I think
that's
it's
just... Sorry, go
it's-
ahead, Direwolf.
Yeah, well, actually, I suppose also might be different. I've never played with the old flight model, so, but I feel like it's like kind of thinking like of the current balance. It seems like it would kind of make sense because like the way that you counter aerospace is like you have somebody who like if an aerospace pilot wants to play super safe, they can just balloon you. They can go straight up from 90 degrees on a lot of maps, and you need to have somebody from a slightly different, like a slightly removed angle who can actually hit them if they're coming down at like a 90-degree angle. Otherwise, they're just like invincible. Nobody can touch them. So if you have like a very small amount of players on a team, like especially if it's in pubs and there's no voice or anything, like it's really hard to be able to like scream at somebody and be like, "Yo, please move at like an offset angle so you can shoot this airspace." And also the player has to be good enough to actually hit them in a way that significantly damages them, etc.
All while having to deal with
I've
ground
played-
targets.
Yeah.
I've played versus starter, where people take ASF immediately out of the gate by getting money from other players in like 6v6 pubs. And that's not a ton of fun, especially right at the beginning. So I definitely think it's a good idea to probably look at how many ASF your team has before you buy one, but I've never heard of that being a rule.
Well, actually, I think you're thinking of a slightly different angle because on one it's like, oh, they're oppressive, like oh, they're too annoying, like people can't kill them, and from your perspective, because I know that you've expressed a lot of frustration about, oh my god, this person is buying an aerospace at the beginning of the game and being useless. That's another very like valid angle.
I mean, they're nerfing their team effectively.
Yeah, no, they
if
are.
you're in a
in
Sparrowhawk.
sense. It's like obnoxious to play against, but also it's not very effective. Which is kind of what I eventually want to come around to. So it's like on the one hand, it's like, well, like it's really hard to counter, but also you don't really need to counter it because like a player who's like kind of doing ballooning memes in their starter aerospace who isn't making that much money and isn't having that much of an impact on the ground, especially if there's any kind of like cover.
That's not a lot of DPS between loops.
It's not. So it's like another one of these things where it's like, well, I mean, I suppose it makes sense because I guess it's a little bit more fun for people, or it's less likely to end up with somebody feeling like they're constantly being ballooned forever. But it's also not like a really important thing, and there's ways to counter it.
I remember
in
I
my
was
opinion.
playing on Dune, and my team had 5 players, the enemy team had 6, and so because they had more up on us and had more players, taking out that aircraft or into the battlefield actually wasn't hurting their team so much, and they were really able to take advantage of that. Oh my gosh.
That's a move I'll typically do, not as like a flex, as how you're saying it, but if teams are unbalanced, just because that's what the pop is, I'll typically hop into, or not typically, but I'll sometimes, and I've seen other people do this, as like a soft way to balance, because you can't split a player in half, I'll hop into something a little bit less impactful, like
Suboptimal.
an aerospace.
You're getting the firepower out. If you're getting the firepower out of an aerospace, but you're not getting the capping game. So yeah, I can see what you're saying there.
Yeah, that's the one downside of aerospace not a lot of newer players recognize. They only see aerospace at its worst, because that's when it's most memorable, is when you're being profoundly dunked upon by a Shiva or Xerxes, and they don't understand the drawbacks that are coming from if there's something in the air, it's not on the ground capping. And ticket bleed is a real deal when it comes to terrain control. And not just ticket bleed, 5 versus 6 or X versus X minus 1 in any team fight, mechs have a lot of damage, and missing out on one mech in just terms of damage and sharing armor, that'll turn the fight in the favor of who's got +1 more often than not.
Yeah. I think it's less damage because like a good aerospace pilot can actually put down the damage they need to, and like if they can do it before fights, so that's easier for the ground targets to do so, or if you're able to like snipe off a really important component. But the real disadvantage is always from armor, because like if there's just fewer targets on the ground for the enemy team to shoot at, it means that there's more fire being focused on each one.
And the people who
really hurts.
The people who are good enough to make an aerospace impactful generally won't be taking it in a situation where it would put their team at a disadvantage. So if you're getting an aerospace and it's putting your team at a disadvantage, more often than not, the person who's flying the aerospace isn't going to be a super vet.
That's something I've heard many times before, and is important to reiterate whenever you get the chance to. The best aerospace pilots are the ones that know when not to fly.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing to learn. If you want to get into aerospace, look at when the people you know are good at flying aren't flying. Because a big deal is knowing, is this just going to be a throw for the team? Getting up in the air? And that's its own big thing. Have you guys done a subject on when not to fly, what is flying, etc.?
We did a little bit on TC Meta, I believe.
Yeah. I think we covered it pretty extensively on there. But I know that like I've had games where the player on my team that's currently flying is the one who's in the lead, and their high rank, their high amount of money that they spawn in with is being spent on getting that airplane. And so even though they're number 1 on the team, they're not actually contributing, because the team, or in this particular case, they weren't actually contributing because, sure, they'd blow up an enemy tank or enemy mech here or there, but we were losing on the caps pretty bad. And if they had been on the ground, they would have been able to push the forward spawn that had been denied to us. They would have been able to bring an assault mech when the rest of our team was just in heavies.
And the same thing with that applies with assets like really strong like support role assets. Like if you're looking at an LRM boat, an aero boat, an ASF, if you are in the top, if you're top econ and you're taking one of those assets, you are significantly, depending on the phase the game is, you could be significantly hampering your team's ability to hold caps and win team fights.
That is I don't want to call LRM or aeroboats impressive support assets, but you're correct in saying, for sure, if you're the highest ranked member on your team, you kind of have an obligation to put your money where it matters, as in something that will affect the board. And the most board affecting units are 9 times out of the 10, depending on board state, mechs. And knowing what to buy and when, putting your money to good use. Maybe it's an assault mech. Maybe you've got a downton into maybe a big, heavier medium. But it's kind of deceptive, because you'll see someone climb up the ranks really quickly doing ASF stuff, and then they'll stay in the air. And you've got a bunch of heavies and stuff on the ground, the other team's getting heavies and assaults. Your big anchor that should be in an assault pushing the board is still doing loop-de-loops in the air. And
I will say you can do both, though, in a sense. Like, if you are able to effectively force the enemy team to like start pulling anti-air assets, or like pull a dedicated fighter to kill you, or if you are able to like really nuke their carries, or you're able to nuke their backcappers, and you're able to somehow like suppress really important parts of their team, then it's okay. But as mentioned earlier, you have to know when to go ground. So when, for example, they do start throwing like fighters at you, or you see that like, oh my god, they've started buying 3 Partisan alphas, like then you just go ground and then buy something else. But like knowing when to switch is the hard part. But like just simply being in the air doesn't necessarily mean you're not pulling your weight. But it is hard to do so.
It's interesting that you brought up that whole the thing about pulling dedicated anti-aircraft assets, because that was part of the rationale for the for requiring 6 players on a side before aircraft pulling aircraft back in the day, was that if you have more than, or if you have fewer than 6 players, then you can't really afford, in most circumstances, to bring a dedicated anti-aircraft asset. You're having to, maintain board presence all over the map with, mediums and lights and stuff. And if one of you goes and grabs the Partisan Bravo or the Partisan Alpha or something like that, you might be too slow to really contribute to the game. And so even though you are able to fend off the aircraft somewhat, your team's actually losing even more because you had to take something that wasn't optimal for the current state. And that rule from 420 ME and way back in the day actually kind of carried over into the first iteration of one of the first iterations of Chaos March.
Yeah, that's still around, and whenever we say, oh, this event's going to have quote-unquote Chaos March rules, it's a little bit of a misnomer to call Partisans and Riflemen dedicated AA platforms, whereas
I want to say that.
You'll see that plastered all over the wiki. Their guns work on mechs too. When you hear someone say dedicated AA, you should be thinking of fighter planes, because fighter planes can really spank something and cancel something out of the sky, countering it, basically. But once that plane's out of the air, your Sparrowhawk's not going to do a whole lot to mechs. And it's pretty much utterly ignorable. Even when it gets to the Rusalka Alpha, that's got 3 Rec 2, devastating to planes. But if there's no planes in the sky, you're not making a lot of force against the ground unless they've got tons and tons of tanks and hovercraft that'll suffer from your multipliers.
So one thing I did want to cover, and I wanted an opinion from each of you on this, is when do you decide to donate to other players?
When I'm underbuying.
So like if you get if you've got like 70K and you're still buying Ravens or something.
Yeah, I'm donating all what I can to other players.
Typically, personally speaking, I'll never donate before buying, because I will like to use, more than often or not, I'll like to use all my money that I worked hard for. But I find a more impactful way to spread the money around, because spreading your money around is an effective way to boost your team, which it's hilarious the amount of impact you can have just not letting your C-bills go to waste, is to keep an eye on who dies and then constantly keep checking with tab to see when the little skull disappears and they've respawned, and just throw them a 10K without asking. And giving them that boost when they spawn is going to do so much more than waiting or hoping for people to ask, because unfortunately in pubs people don't notify you when they spawn. Organized terrain control, you'll see that a lot more often, thankfully, but in pubs it's almost looked down upon, because it's joked about asking for spares, especially in the very beginning of the match. But asking for spares when you spawn is something I and a lot of other players look for, because come mid/late game, everybody's got a spare 10k to give, and it's just going to waste sitting there. That's going to disappear when you die without ranking up. And it's just quite literally money going to waste.
So when you're saying
yeah.
that the money disappears, it's when you don't have enough money saved up beyond your rank, right?
Yeah, typically, unless you're, well, I'm not going to say typically for a specific person, but 8 out of 10 deaths unassigned that happen per team will be without ranking up. And so your money, quote unquote, gets reset. And you could have given up to how much money you had without having lost anything upon respawning, because you didn't rank up or you didn't earn more.
So if you died with 40k, that 40k is gone. Whereas if you died with 150k, but you were only going to be spawning with 100k, and now you spawn back in with 150k, you didn't really lose that stuff. It's only a small logistical loss instead of a big one.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a distinction with the nitty gritty. You got to know how the spawns and ranks and C-bills work, but the simplified version is just give your money whenever you see someone respawn if you want your team to do well. The ranks and stuff, I don't like sweating about like, oh man, I could use this 10k when I respawn. Maybe I'm near a rank, blah, 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 blah. Because when I respawn, I'll just ask for spares. And if I've been giving out spares, the spares come back typically in greater volume, I find.
That sounds like karma.
And that's a great way. Well, I wouldn't say karma. It's just, well, if you see people and they're asking for spares and they give spares, et cetera, the sharing comes back, and you typically will have more than the 10k you lost or gave away.
To add on what Architect just said, I 100% agree. People are more likely to give you spares if you give them spares. So if you know you're going to be looking for spares and you have extra money, you should give it out. To give a specific example of when I like to give out money, so often after the really early game, usually the first or second brawl, if you're still alive, you'll go back to upgrade. And sometimes when you do that, it's better to buy a strong medium as opposed to a clan heavy, because those things just become C-bill pinatas. And so you underbuy when you upgrade, and then you can give out to other people upgrading, so the strength can be spread more evenly across the team, and you won't have such drastic tier drops, especially if you won the first couple of fights.
So that's kind of similar to what Koume was saying.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry, go on.
and about pub etiquette, about sparing your money. Back in the days, there was ability to give all money that you have to other player right at the beginning of the match. About 40k at the start of the match will probably mess with balance a bit.
Yeah, I don't think I really would want to have been around when that was the thing.
That sounds incredibly cursed, yeah.
2-minute Mad Cat memes, which we've talked about before.
Something like early Atlas was very common back in the days, but there was unspoken rule about not getting overturned more than your opponent.
A little bit on what Dead Salmon was saying about not hopping into an early assault or an early clan heavy, depending on your early game fight success. Don't look at that as an etiquette thing. It can very often be a profound throw overturning too fast because of how the tiers work these days. Yep. And like Salmon was saying, spreading your money out is so much better than centralizing it. Not just in early game, but in the grand scheme of how mech impact weighs up. 2 mediums on the field are going to be able to do a lot more than splitting the C-bills raw into that much heavies and that just continues to scale up, versus you'd rather have 2 heavies on the field than 1 assault, et cetera, et cetera. And so spreading that out instead of kind of hoarding it is going to do your team a lot better. Not just that, under or overturning early can catapult the enemy team into a snowball because of how the tiers work.
Yeah. Just for me, like, the way that I think about it is, like, I usually prefer to use I usually like give spares like when there's somebody who like I trust is asking for spares, and like they're asking for an asset that I know will be useful. Like when somebody asks, oh, spares for aerospace or spares for like something like what I know what their buy order usually is, and the thing that they're usually going to buy is not really helpful for the situation. I won't really give money. Like that, so like my first criterion is always like, does this person need it, and do I think they'll do a better job of the money than like what I'm currently doing? And the other is just kind of like how much, like kind of what I'm going for. Sometimes I'll be like slingshotting myself, where I'll be taking some small asset and like trying to abuse tiers to go up as high as possible, as fast as possible, to get something big, so then I can start having a really big impact on the team. In that case, sometimes like I'll be a little bit like more stingy with when I'm giving out spares. Like I'll just give ammo spares or whatever if people ask for them, but not like 10K to somebody.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like sometimes
if somebody's throwing the game by repeatedly building trying to build the same aerospace over and over again, and then just ramming it into the enemy team until it dies, and they're begging for spares, that's just going to enable them to get more, get a bigger plane, and is going to exacerbate the situation, make it worse, so that when their plane blows up, the bigger one that they bought, it's worth more tickets, it hurts your team more, and the enemies rank up more for killing it.
People will do this with tanks and mechs too. It's definitely not limited to aerospace. There are specific players that I will be very careful about giving spares to, because I know they're going to get the biggest possible thing, and they are not going to be very careful with it. So I would rather not be the one to enable them. That's usually a little bit harsh.
Topic all on its own is that brings it back to etiquette. Is the deception of being in first place on your team in terms of score.
Oh, yes.
Because currently, the ticket contribution, tickets secured versus tickets lost per player, is an invisible, untallied statistic. And so, you may be the top scoring player on your team, but if you've gotten to that top score by routinely on the timer running, I don't know, Thor Deltas as fast as you can into the enemy firing line, you're actually putting your team at a disadvantage, because each Thor Delta costs X tickets, and each Thor Delta that dies is giving the enemy players how many amount of C-bills from damage that a Thor Delta has in hit points. And instead of, while you may be basking in the glory of first place upon your team, you're sinking your team ship by just throwing intentionally, or maybe unintentionally.
And leading into that, I think one of the other things, when you see someone doing that, especially if you know they're a new player or buying an asset which you know isn't going to help, what do you guys think the best way is to
yell as loud as you can at your screen and just keep typing? This is where you need to be verbal. They need to learn.
Yeah, I usually try and say like, hey, like try and be careful about or I'll usually like just talk about positioning info. Like I usually won't tell people like, oh, you're dying too much, because that's kind of like, even if like sometimes I'll get like frustrated. I'm like, damn, like there are people on my team who are throwing big assets and this sucks. But like usually telling that to people usually is like really confrontational. So what I usually do is I just like give positioning advice. It's like, oh, you're like, I think you're too far away from the rest of the team, or like, oh, this place is like really remote, or we can't really help you. Things like this, because if you give that kind of information, then people are usually like they'll get better about not dying. So they'll bleed less tickets, and they'll usually be in places where they need to be. They'll be contributing more armor and firepower.
And sometimes when it's just like generally being naive or something, you can even just redirect them, even if you're not necessarily helping them improve for the future. Let's say they've been bringing the same crappy assault out over and over again.
Oh yeah. Varying choice
recommend
matters a lot.
yeah, it's like recommend something different for them to buy. Just like, oh yeah, buy this mech or asset instead. We really need one of those out on the battlefield right now.
I usually I'll do stuff like that they're already doing. Like because like if somebody doesn't really understand a role, because sometimes like people will buy brawlers and they don't really know exactly what it is they like, or they'll like the feel of a gun, so they'll just like only buy assets with that gun or something. I'll try and like get them something that's a little bit more lateral to whatever they're used to, as opposed to here, like go buy this different type of asset. So it's like there are people who will just like there are some people who I know who will just like only buy UAC 20s, like new players, because they're like, oh my god, this gun sounds so good, it looks so good.
And there's some people who like.
So I'll tell them like, oh, okay, instead.
There's some people who like will just like a particular mech, and they'll buy it over and over again, the same variant. And you say, hey, I know you like this mech. How about try a different Loki? Like this other Loki fits your playstyle better.
Yeah,
maybe
I'll do
just
that
don't buy Loki in the first place. So, something I like to do, particularly when I run into this, it's a very common trap for maybe midway up the competency slope of a new player, is this run and gunning, because they'll learn the mechanics and controls of the game before the niche meta of tickets, C-bills, and throwing and tiers, etc. A good way to negate this in a new player is to use chat, not to berate them, as I may have implied, but to say, hey, stick with me. And it really helps if you physically put yourself in their screen first before you say it in the chat. And that 10 out of 10 times, you've got a battle buddy. And that, regardless of if you're with someone who's throwing, being in a dedicated 2-mech unit will do so much for the board, no matter what you're doing, or no matter what the game state is. So that's also a great way to kind of put a hiccup in front of someone dedicated to sitting in the respawn timer as long as possible. The most egregious way that this comes up, though, is with aerospace, because when someone gets in this gotta go fast, gotta get back to the respawn timer as fast as possible mindset, and aerospace can enable that like no other asset, because it can get to the fight faster than anything else, and it can gun things down and has a lot of punch, but it also inordinately has a lot of tickets tied to each aerospace death.
Or rather, it's easier to die fast in aerospace, even if like the number of tickets for each aerospace isn't that high.
That's a good part of it. Is aerospace are disproportionately very easy to swat out of the sky if you don't know what you're doing.
And I think you said something that was really valuable in there about if you want to improve the effectiveness of a player who may be newer, then one of the best things you can do is stick with them. Like, even if they may not focus the same target as you, like you said, having 2 mechs in the same spot is just going to improve their effectiveness so much. And if you're a newer person, or you may not feel as confident about your solo brawling abilities, if you pick someone who's doing well and follow them, you will probably do better yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Like just being around and sharing armor and like getting used to how they position, like how these other people position organically, and also letting them draw aggro for you so you can get damage, and you can get tons of C-bills and points that way. It's good.
Yeah, that's advice that's often reiterated because it's great advice. If you're a new player, not just look at the top scoring person and follow them. Find anyone and follow them. If you see a new player unknowingly throwing and feeding, intervene. You can make a difference in this new player's life. If you see a vet that should know better, that's when you can get in chat and get salty.
Yeah, pretty much that.
So I'm looking at our topics, and another one that's on the list is when should you switch teams?
That's a question that many people will answer very differently. I'm sure that's the reason why it's this topic.
Do we want to do a round robin here and just everybody give? Yeah. Okay, I'll start. I'll switch teams once I've told the enemy team I'm switching I've told my team I'm switching. And usually if there's a particularly egregious ticket or player count difference. But I won't switch into to make a +3 team. I won't do that. Even if we're up 200 tickets, I don't think you should switch to make a +3 team. But that's my opinion.
Okay, I guess I can go next. I think I basically adhere to almost exactly the same thing, where I'll pretty much only ever switch if it's like not a super egregious population, like if there's some kind of population imbalance, or if there's like some super egregious like 200 ticket plus difference. But again, it's really, really obnoxious, even if you're up like a lot, to play against a team that has like 3 or 4 more players. The other difference also, I think, for me is that like if I'm ever like the top of my team's scoreboard and like I'm the one who's like doing all the coordination, like if I like look at if I press tab, for example, and I see like, okay, there's like 1 or 2 other experienced people on this team, maybe. Everybody else here is like mostly just kind of going with the momentum of the game. And if I were to leave, there'd be nobody like making calls, there would be nobody drawing aggro, then like I'll usually ask somebody else to switch because I feel like it could potentially go really bad if I were to leave. And also because like you can't always predict when, like if like for example a good player joins or a veteran joins and is like, oh, I'm not going to join the team, it's up by 200 or it's up by a bunch of players, like that team will just like collapse. And I'll usually just like if we're up a bunch of tickets, above a bunch of players or whatever, and it's like that, I'll usually just do something that's like I'll kind of like experiment to do something a little bit weird, but I won't usually switch teams.
That's a good point to mention, is if you're the anchor, quote unquote, and like you've got the lion's share of the C-bills from damage done / kill confirms, switching teams is just going to make things flip and then turn even worse for whatever team you've abandoned. Preempting and contextualizing this entire thing of when to switch teams or not is kind of the etiquette implied of if there's a ticket difference of, say, 100 or more, or maybe there's one team that's up a bunch of players, it's typically frowned upon to join the team that's already winning by leaps and bounds. That's not something that's going to garner a bunch of smiles and nods. It's typically good etiquette when you first boot up and join a game to say, okay, this team is down by a substantial amount of tickets and or 1 player or more. That's the one I should hop on.
So hit tab.
And it's more fun that way, honest to goodness.
Press tab.
Joining an easy win game, you're not going to be challenged as much versus fighting uphill and having your skills tested. And that's something not a lot of players, a lot of the time I'll see, and it makes me salty every time. People will hop in and say, I just want an easy win. I'm just here to have fun. And that makes me sad because you're not supposed to have fun here. You're supposed to win.
Well, I'm switching when I'm not top scorer in my team, and also someone asks someone to switch teams.
Yeah, that's a good time to do it. If someone asks, then you should look at yourself and be like, am I anchoring, or can I make this a more pleasant game because they just lost their anchor or something?
And just to reiterate this, always communicate when you're going to switch.
Yes.
Like, some of my least favorite memories with switching are being on a team that's up by maybe 1 or 2 players and then having 5 people switch to the other team.
Ooh, yeah.
This has happened to me. Yes. Sometimes it's not even an exaggeration. There are multiple times where I can remember that there would be like 4 people who would switch, and a lot of them would be like the good players. So it's just like, this is bad.
Good
Typically,
players
it's the good players that know when to switch and will respect. The best players are there because they want to have a good time. And having a good time typically is not having a stomp, and so they'll be the ones to switch. And like you said, when you have all the good players from one team switch spontaneously because they all had the bright idea, oh man, this game's getting a little tilted in favor of one side. Communication, that's something I'd honestly not thought about. Could have stopped that, I guess. Personally, when I like to switch is when it's an obnoxious difference of maybe like when it gets into the 200s, that's a good time, I feel, regardless of player balance. I like to see the tickets within 100, 150. That's achievable. That's like one or two team fights and knowing how to hold the bases. When it gets above that, then it's like, okay, maybe there's a skill discrepancy here. Maybe there's a vet stack, blah, 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 blah. And or if there's a specific player who is fun to play against, or we'll just get really salty. It's fun to swap against them.
So I found that when if nobody said anything about switching teams, occasionally I'll look up at the tickets and see that, say, my team's way ahead, and I'll hit tab and I'll look at the score of my players, see how many kills they have. Like, do they have way more kills than the enemy? This isn't, none of these stats individually indicate that I need to switch. It's like all these things coming together that tell me whether or not I should switch. And so I'll look at the score, and maybe it's a little bit, maybe it's just barely getting into the mid game, and my team has 10 kills, and the other team has a grand total of 1 kill after you account for suicides. And that's like, that's so sad. And so maybe they're not down on that many tickets, but they are probably losing pretty badly in in terms of economy. So that's when I type !team stats, and I usually put it in team chat, not into the public chat, because only one team really needs to see it. I don't always want to telegraph that I'm looking to switch. I'll type in !team stats, hit enter, and then take a look, and it'll tell me the average rank among the top players on each team. And if there's say anything greater than a 1.5 point difference in those ratings, because those ratings usually go from like 1 to 10 or so. But if there's more than a 1.5 point difference, then I'll probably consider switching if I'm doing well. Now, if I'm doing poorly, like if let's say my team is doing well, but I'm doing poorly, then I'll maybe ask somebody else on my team to switch.
And I mean, now that you've brought up commands, I feel like something I should mention while the theme is etiquette. Don't spam load map, next map, if you're not happy with the map that it's on. We get
That's a good segue to, we could just spend the rest of the podcast talking about this.
Yeah.
But please don't.
A handful of players are known for their judicious requests of load map, particularly when they happen to be at a 10 ticket disadvantage or 2 or 3 kill disadvantage on their team. And
or
that's
are
just
playing versus a better player.
Or when you want to reshuffle the teams to innocuously shoulder up to a better player so you can have another easy win. That's just a little bit obnoxious. And again, something that's, you think you're smug and sly, but people are watching and it's kind of really stupid. A good time to load /swap map, that's even when it's like a 300 ticket lead or something. Some people, that's where I disagree with a lot of people. Honest to goodness, I like to fight up, not personally, but it's like, if it's just a gigantic stomp, let it play out. I think that it should just play out, because if it's a gigantic stomp, it's going to be over soon enough anyways. And it also gives an opportunity for the newer players /vets to learn how to capitalize on mistakes and turn a losing game around. There has been, it's not a terribly rare occurrence, there has been recoveries from 300, 400, 500 ticket leads. Maybe not 500. I think you only start with 500. There's been large ticket recoveries, and that's something that's really fun to play into, is when the other team gets a hilarious disadvantage or hilarious advantage, gets all high and tidy in their assaults, and then they throw. That's really fun, being the underdog and making a mean comeback. And it's even more fun when it's actually organic and not from the headache of team switching and some vets joined late, et cetera, et cetera. So
I'd rather try to fix like a major imbalance with a few player swaps than completely shuffling the teams by doing a load map. And that brings about complete other problems. Like, let's say you're in the mid game and you're almost starting to get into the late game and your team is finally getting some heavies out there. What a big disappointment for all the players that have been, they put in the 25 minutes it took to get into those heavy mechs. And now, because the ticket imbalance is too high, you're saying, let's just switch to the next map. I mean, that's miserable.
That's a good note. That's a good note to say, not to all the vets, but all the marginally competent people. It may be easy to meme your way into an early Mad Cat just locusting around, but I remember it was in general chat on the Discord earlier, like, how to get into a Mad Cat for Dummies. I'd buy that book. A lot of new players or people who don't dedicate their lives to Mechwarrior, who spend the majority of their time in medium or shitty IS heavy, and they look at clan heavies as like a glorious treat, and you're taking that away from them because it takes them 25 minutes to get into a Mad Cat. So you should be considerate of those people as well, and not just them. The 25 minutes for a Mad Cat is 25 minutes for an assault for someone else, and you're kicking them in the face too.
Yeah, honestly, I've very rarely have I ever seen a load map or a next map succeed more than 5 to 10 minutes into a match. Like, the use for load map or next map is when you load into Warzone with 8 people.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Or Forsaken at any population. Or Bogs at any population.
Hard to disagree with both.
Bogs is great.
Sure.
Get out of here. Yeah, actually, there are a lot of people who will load map not for nefarious reasons, but purely just for the purpose of, I don't like this map, so I'm going to spam load map because I really don't want to play here. But I think like there are some people who will do the things that we talked about earlier, but for the most part, I think it's just like people who'll just be like, I'm really frustrated and I want to play the pub game because it's only one pub game and I don't want to be on this map. But it's still really aggravating for everybody involved to have to like sit there while they're screaming in team chat trying to get a load map. So
it's team chat screaming for everybody is annoying. The server banner in front of your face is annoying. And do know, on the off chance your load map does somehow fire off, every other load map, you're more or less guaranteed to lose 1 or 2 players on map load because some people will be like, well, I was already going to log off for the night and here the map's ended. I lost my 25-minute Mad Cat. I'm out of here. So count on the pop getting smaller if you want to load a map. You've always got the option to just tough it out no matter what map you're on. Learning something new and getting used to another environment, that's never a bad thing either, unless it's Bogs.
Yeah, most people switch at the end of a map. So think about that when you're load mapping in the middle of a game.
Yeah, that's really it. Too many servers that have died because somebody's like, oh, I don't want to play this map.
Yeah.
I honestly can't really think of other things that bother me in pubs more than that. It's basically just people who are constantly like yelling about maps.
Obsessive chat warrior.
That too, I suppose. But even then, I can usually just ignore them or mute them.
Oh, yeah. Just for anybody out there, if you press tab, the same thing we've been talking about to look at score, and then press spacebar, next to everybody's name, there's a microphone symbol. If they're being not very nice in chat, click on that button and you won't hear from them again.
You will not.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Glorious feature.
The preferred method of dealing with chat warriors is to find them on their pitiful LRM hill and spank them, because if they're typing, they're not playing.
Yeah, there aren't very many people who have the super speed type ability to type while playing effectively.
Spawning Raccoon.
Yeah.
I forgot who it was. I think it was Buff Skeleton who said he has magic hands, and I think that is like I just can't get rid of that image because it's very true. He drives very fast assets and is still able to constantly make callouts like while he's playing hovers. Like every time I see him, like I know that like he is instantly like he has told the entire team where I am. Like despite the fact he's still moving, like sometimes you can tell. Like when somebody's like, oh, suddenly they stop moving because they're like making a call out. But with him, I can never tell. I just know that I know they're going to know.
Suspicious. He's got keybinds mapped to every frequently playing player. Darrell spotted Echo 4 key map.
He does assets more than players, but yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, just to talk about something that was brought up there, if you play well and participate with your team and are just a good team player, people will remember you. Like, it's a small community. Like, what you do and how you behave isn't forgotten.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, cheaters are just kind of recognized, and there is a little bit of infamy that comes with it that some people may unfortunately be attracted to. But at the end of the day, you're not going to have a good time if people don't like you. Going back to spares, you're not going to get spares if everybody hates you because they know you're going to just be dumb in aerospace and or dumb in doing whatever the heck else are you doing. Or maybe you want to sit down and have a good time, but previous matches you flamed everybody, and so you're not going to get spares. People aren't going to follow you around in battle. Or maybe people are going to be like, oh, hey, there's Direwolf. He was a real pain in the neck last time. I'm going to focus him down. And my entire team will remember Direwolf from being a flamer, whatever the heck, games ago. And they'll focus you down. And you're going to have even less fun that way.
So when it comes to donations and asking for spares, do you think it's helpful to tell people what the spares are for?
Always. If I'm suspicious that they're going to be used for like ELRMs, arrows, ASF, not that those aren't valid playstyles, but I'll ask. But if you tell me what you're going to buy, like 3K for a Massacari Prime, I'm far more likely to give it to you, just offhand, if I have no idea who you are.
If you're suspicious, I wouldn't give spares in the first place. A little bit of the idea of choosing and giving spares on the timer, quote unquote, when someone's respawning. Direwolf got into this a little bit, but knowing who to give spares to on the timer, if you're looking to boost your team, just choose to give maybe 10K on the timer to the top half of your scoreboard. You can never really go, well, you can, but most of the time you won't be going wrong randomly choosing some person on the top half of your scoreboard and giving it to them on respawn.
On that note, if a confident player late joins, you should also give to them.
I'm still giving 10K for novice players so they can take any asset which they like and contribute with it.
Yeah, I know that, like, for a lot of newbies, maybe they've been playing for a while and they're still just stuck in the same light mechs that they started with, and they just haven't been able to get into anything bigger. And even though it isn't necessarily as good for your team because they might buy something that they're then going to lose and it'll blow up, yeah, it's nice to get them into something bigger. I guess a really good way of being able to tell whether or not something is good or whether it's good to donate to somebody like that is just see, like, if they have, -2 kills and 14 deaths, please, no, even if they're a novice, don't donate 10K. But maybe they have 2 deaths and 0 kills. That's maybe a good candidate to help them out, let them actually experiment a little in an actual competitive environment instead of expecting them to go to, what do you call that, the free testing server.
Yeah, anyone with a negative number in their kills spot, be suspicious. It could be an aerospace main. So your spares are better kept than wasted on aerospace.
Another thing with donations is if you receive a donation, please don't give it back. I don't know how many times I've been a battle armor and desperately trying to get rid of my cash. I'll say something like, "Who needs my cash?" or "Who can take my cash?" And nobody says anything. It's very frustrating. I'll then just randomly donate it to somebody, and then they donate it right back to me. And I'm like, "No, stop it! Don't donate it to me."
Now
And then
you're
I
both
die.
on timer, and no money has significantly changed hands.
Yeah.
Well, at least you could buy some more SRM with that, right?
If only they would load back in.
You always have to remember, yeah, I know that like whenever I go buy ammo for battle armor to fire my SRMs twice to get them to start reloading if I've fired all the ones I had before. Because if they're completely empty, you can only buy, 6 SRMs. But if you buy 6, fire twice, you'll load up 2 more SRMs, and then you can buy 2 more for a total of 8.
Going back to what Koume has said on specifically giving spares to newbies or new friends, I don't enjoy giving spares to them, but what I will try to do whenever the opportunity arises, very often you'll be returning to base from maybe a couple of good skirmishes in a bushwhacker, and you've got enough C-bills to sell your bushwhacker into a good clan heavy, or maybe an assault. And you're not going to do that anyways, because that's not what the board is asking for. Instead, if I see a painfully obvious new player, it's often a good play to hop out of your mech, or communicate this ahead of time, but to give that player your mech. Because A, they would not have been able to afford that in the first place, and B, you're not putting them into the onus of looking through the intimidating catalog of mechs at your disposal. And you've pre-selected something that you know is good, and they're probably going to have to learn how to use anyways eventually. And you can use then their old mech and sell it and get into something, or just use whatever amount of C-bills you had left and buy something anyways in the price bracket you were going to be hunting for. But I've given away a couple rack atlases to great avail, because those players would not have already gotten into it, and having someone in that asset is something that's typically good for the team in terms of...
That brings up something that I was thinking about, and that I actually did today, is what do you do when you're about to quit and you're like a high-ranked player on your team?
Usually, like this actually happens to me a disappointing amount, where I'll have to leave during a game. Sometimes I'm in like a Fafnir. What I usually do is I announce the position. This is just a very specific example. You'll have to forgive me. I'll announce where I am. I'll say I have to leave. Who wants this? Come and get it. And then I power down and get out. Don't eject, especially if you're in a fresh mech, because if you eject, they're going to have to take your mech all the way back to base to repair your head, to avoid getting head capped.
I know with me, like if, let's say I've just died and the phone's starting to ring and I need to go, well, not the phone ringing, but like maybe I just died and I'm going to be late to my meeting or something. I will actually pretty quickly buy a mech at main, get into it, hop out of it, and then tell everybody that there's a free assault mech or a free heavy mech back at base. Because when my team loses, let's say I were the top player, when my team loses the top player, that can be really bad for them. If they were already really far ahead, that's not so bad. But if maybe the teams are pretty comparable, or maybe my team was way behind, if I don't buy them that mech, that's going to mean that they're going to be down on tons. They're on the field. They're not going to have the mechs, the assets, whatever, to contend with the enemy's ranks.
Yeah, that's always a good idea, to mitigate the loss of having to abandon your team midway through a fight, which always feels bad, especially if you're really invested in it. But yeah, buying something or giving away what you've already got is always better than just vanishing. Especially, don't vanish if you're in the middle of a fight, like your phone rings and it's like, okay, goodbye Fafnir, as in, goodbye match. Have fun.
Just right before we get too far away from new players and sending spares, if just on the topic of being a nice person, if somebody needs spares to repair their mech, really, you should probably just give it to them.
Yeah. Even if they made a really poor choice of what mech to buy, it's still good to help them repair.
Yeah, that's not just a newbie play, or it's not just newbies who will have to do a repair cycle before earning enough to afford it. Very often, a vet in a very important asset will make a wrong turn or be jumped and barely make it out alive before having put out a significant amount of damage. So giving spares for repairs is probably one of the highest priority reasons to give spares out. That and ammo is probably second.
Yeah, it's one of these things where like you don't really have any. There's pretty much no question that what you're giving your spares for will be useful. Like if you're giving for ammo, because that's basically you're basically like instantly doubling the combat effectiveness or whatever combat life of whatever asset you're giving your money to. And repairs is just like these people probably won't be leaving the hangar if they're not repaired, for example, or if they can't afford to be active in combat for more than 30 or 40 seconds.
Yeah, every second that you delay donating to them is another second that they aren't out on the battlefield.
Yeah, either that they aren't in the hangar or when they're on the battlefield, they'll have to go back to rep cycle because they have like no armor left or they have no ammo.
Yeah, heaven forbid you make someone unnecessarily down-ton because they're in something too damaged to even survive one volley, or you force them back into the field and they just die after having waited on the repair pad for 45 seconds.
Yeah, like if they've already spent a little bit of money repairing their Fafnir and they're asking for spares to repair and no, they never get them and they have to sell their Fafnir. A damaged Fafnir sells for a bit, but if you're already at zero, it's not going to sell for enough to buy even some of the more expensive light mechs, I bet.
I think a damaged Fafnir is actually like not a terrible place.
If you're in the 140 Fafnir, you're going to get 80k. If depending on how damaged it is.
Yeah, because you can get a medium or something, but even if you don't sell, like a damaged assault mech is still like a massive presence on the battlefield, so you can still manipulate aggro, you can still put down a lot of firepower even if you're being like a coward, like, and just start peeking occasionally. Just then it's not the I think it's like not the worst thing if you can't get all of your armor back. It's like really bad if you're like in some middle tier asset, I think, where you're like in a sheep bushy or like a chimera or whatever, where like, oh shit, I lost an arm or I have no armor left, so if I show up, I'm going to die in 10 seconds, like, or less. As soon as I appear, I'm just going to get given by something. And it's going to take me a while to get all my money back, and if I sell, I'm not going to be able to buy anything. And I basically have to suicide. Like, that's the worst.
So one of the questions I had was, and I already have some thoughts on it that I'll go over first. And it's, are closer games better than games that are more stompy? And my thoughts on that is that games that go longer, even though it can be kind of grindy a little bit sometimes, and it provides an opportunity for newer players to play for long enough to potentially actually buy the heavy mechs that they want. And so if you try to end a game more quickly by letting it be a stomp, then the result is that some of those players might not even get a chance to be in those bigger mechs. I'm sure there's other advantages and disadvantages to this. Any thoughts?
I think more dynamic games are more interesting. Like, it's not really a matter of like how long they go. It's just like, is there a chance for interesting things to happen in this game? And usually closer games are one that are more back and forth. Like, you'll have people who are making interesting pushes or who need to find something to put them over the edge. Like, that's usually a lot more engaging to be in, like, as a player, and less stress. Or it might be more stressful than like a stompy game because it's like, oh, okay, we're going to win, I don't have to do anything, or oh, we're going to lose, I don't have to do anything. But it's just more stimulating, I guess. I prefer having games like that, playing that way.
So we mentioned like switching teams as a way to change the balance. But I was just thinking of another thing. Like Architect was saying that like when his team's way ahead or something, he might switch to some sort of asset that doesn't contribute as much to the battle. And I do that too sometimes. Like when I'm the top of my team and my team's doing really well, I'll look through the list. I'll look through the list of mechs in the buy menu and try to pick something I've never picked before. I'll even look up myself on stick stats on Rick the Stick's website and see like what are some things that I've never driven before, and I'll take that out because I can learn something by playing it, and I probably won't contribute as much to my team as my go-to tryhard mechs.
Yeah, everyone's got their own, or eventually learns their own collection of crutch mechs that they can lean on to have a more or less easy win. In regards to why, if closer games are better or not, I feel like a few vets, unfortunately, or not just vets, just people who play a lot, unfortunately, will kind of look and glorify the 0-0 win or the close 10 ticket difference end of match state more than is actually fun, in the sense of like, if you're obsessing over having a balanced game more than just balanced teams, and you're having someone swap back and forth, it's like, oh, we gotta have a balance, that kind of detracts from it, because it's like any advantage you actually accrue in the match is immediately offset by someone swapping, because it's like, oh, my balance. And that can detract. I would personally much rather have a match, stomp or not, of two static teams of more or less equal skill. If it's a stomp of more or less equal skill from the enemy, I know I've earned it, and it's not just one of those happenstance vet stacks that happen, or happenstance throws that also happen. And this is partially why organized terrain control is so much fun. There's a lot less random newborns filtering in, and you've got more or less balanced teams from the get-go. A stomp in organized terrain control is not just as fun, but is also fun, and a close game is also fun as well. But the most important thing is that you're having an engaging match with players of more or less equal skill level, and if you make the bad moves and you earn a loss, that's just going to happen sometimes. And obsessing over balance and screaming about teams in team chat or all chat because you're been playing bad, sometimes you've just got to accept we had to throw. Let's write it out.
Yeah. The thing is, like, determining where that line is. Like, knowing that, our skill, like, being able to determine that both teams have similar skill balance is not easy to figure out. Like, even when you've been playing the game for a long time and you know a ton of players, if you ask somebody, how do you quantify, or even if you can't quantify, like, how do you consider, like, how, like, evenly balanced teams are, like, in terms of skill? Like, that's not an easy thing to know. Like, I do want to clarify, I also think it's really obnoxious when people, like, switch constantly to try and maintain, like, a super close game. Like, it is much more interesting if you have two teams that are, like, that have, a great deal of continuity, so you're able to, like, kind of determine the character who you're fighting against and who your teammates are. And like or rather the character of the game, like how it progresses and what kind of decisions you make, and it feels like they all have consequences. But sometimes you just kind of don't really get there, because one team will have, like, a lot of players who are just way better, like, either mechanically or, like, in terms of map decisions than the other one. So it's like,
There was something that happened today on Extremity, that just before we started recording this podcast, that I recall, where my team was down on tickets and we were going to lose, but I wanted to try to win. And we came very close to winning, but it wasn't fair at all. It wasn't because we switched, like, one player or something. It's because they stacked my team. So my team had, I think at one point, 3 more players than the other team. And that was unnecessary. And it wasn't really fun to almost come to a win, having a comeback is really only fun if you were able to do it at least somewhat on your own merit and not by some sort of really janky game mechanic. And in this case, it was because the server can only handle 28 players, and there were 15 players on my team. And there's no way an additional player joining the server is going to end up on the other team because no additional players can join the server. That's just not fair.
Yeah, that's definitely, Darrell was right. It's really hard to draw the fine line, but there is also a lot of cases of people trying to extend the match just for the sake of having a long match at whatever cost. That's not fun because it reduces the weight of your decisions and it kind of pulls the character out of the match because it's just people hopping around for its own sake. And like you were saying, if you're at a disadvantage or you're behind on tickets, if you have the teams reshuffle to where you've got a tremendous advantage because you had their carry or their top rank player swap over to your team, even if you win, is that really your win of your own merit? Can you really bask in that victory? It does steal the thunder from having the really rewarding underdog victory or punishing one of their bad plays.
I do
because
it can be really entertaining though sometimes when, let's say, it's 14v14 and it's a big stomp. One team's 300 tickets ahead, and maybe the number 1 or number 2 player from the winning team hops over onto my team, the losing team, and actually starts to carry us a little bit, and the rest of us do better. It's kind of cool to see them have to fight their own team, but that's different than, than like these really unfair advantages where you've got like 15 players on one team and 13 players on the other.
Yeah, that's a different case than what I was thinking of. The top 4 of the winning team hop onto the losing team and somehow turn the game around, and everybody cheers because it's an underdog victory.
Yeah, just to kind of summarize here, close games are fun. Close games are worth striving to create. We need to be careful not to create horrifically terrible games in our quest to have fun games.
For the sake of closeness alone, that's where I branch off. I don't really care about the end result as long as at the start and majority and duration of the match, it's equal-ish skill levels between the players. But that's kind of hard to determine for now until we get Rick the Stick's ELO system, and we'll have numeric judgments of how good people are. Soon,
some players aren't always consistent, too.
The only acceptable stat is score per ticket loss.
Score per ticket loss ELO balance, weighted by number of games played over the past 30 days. Easy to code.
Can we see what the effect of having certain other players on my team is for my ELO score, please? Thank you.
You play this percent better when this other player is on the same team as you, and you play this percent better when this player is on the other team.
That would actually be a really interesting stat. Because there are players I know I do a lot well with, because it's like, okay, I've got Rick, the other Rick Hunter. Whenever I start the match with him, it's like, okay, I kind of get the grasp of Rick's playstyle, and I know if I take the heavy machine gun Locust and we just start charging in, he's going to be a reliable, smart gun that's not going to just instantly poof right next to me. And so we always win the first team fight whenever that happens. And there are other players a lot like that. It's like, okay, I recognize Erasmus if he's right next to me and we need to push. If I start pushing in, he's not just going to back away and be like, oh, I need to get ammo right now. So recognizing players and seeing statistics related to that would be pretty interesting. But
the HMG Locust doesn't need any help.
I don't know how much you can really quantify those types of things.
I don't know, some reverse-inverse correlation. There's some statistical nonsense that can make some graph look pretty.
To know.
Also, we've got just a few minutes
thought about
left.
it when... Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we've just got a few minutes left here. of the oh yeah, so I guess the last thing that's on here, there's two things that I wanted to cover. Don't shoot your friends even if you're mad.
Yeah, I think that's pretty intuitive.
The only time I think I shoot,
Don't waste their armor.
I think the only time I shoot somebody on my own team on purpose anymore is when somebody is actively trying to kill me that's on my team.
I mean, a lot of the
then.
time when that happens, it's because people think you're no driver. Like, almost every time I've been shot by somebody, it's because they think I'm an enemy because I'm no driver for them.
Yeah.
Most of the time I get...
For those not in the know, there is a persistent glitch where your mech will show up with no namespace above it, and sometimes TPOs. It will have no namespace above it and show no indication of whose team it's on. Yep. So the assumption is that it's the enemy team.
Oh yeah,
unless you're paying close attention to the reticle.
I always start by saying stop.
Well, yeah, because they can't see your name, they can't know who it is that's saying it. So I'll say I'll usually just be like, "Yo, if you're shooting at the Rio, or the Rio or the Mad Cat or whatever, whatever asset I'm in, I'm on your team. Please stop." And then sometimes they'll get it.
Yeah. Other times you just suffer.
Yeah, but usually it's people who are fairly new, and they'll do something they'll be like BAM gunning you, or I think probably I think the most memorable was a friendly Owens that was tagging me, hitting me with medium lasers. So that was something.
Yeah, there's not. Yeah. If there's someone being jerky and like a pain in the neck, we've nowadays got pretty reliable call to an admin that will, with most admin calls, resolve any conflicts to where you don't need to resort to asserting your dominance with friendly fire. So nowadays, if there's something really pressing to where you feel like, oh man, I really got to put this guy in line, they're probably breaking some rule, or otherwise, if they're not breaking any rules, you're just being a pansy and need to suck it up.
So
I would...
Another piece of etiquette stuff that I wanted to cover, which I just thought of, is you've got an airplane that's maybe never taken off yet. Maybe it's landed for a while, it's repairing, and it's one of those maps where the base lambs don't work quite right for preventing bombs. How do you feel about shooting planes that have been landed for a while on the runway? My personal thing is I don't do it, but I understand that other people are going to.
What situation are you talking about?
But I would do that.
Well, also ASF turrets, base turrets now, are so unbelievably strong against airspace. There are not many situations where you will be able to do this unpunished. So if you're diving somebody's airspace, you're usually not going to make it out alive, and you decide to do it because it's worth the tickets.
Wait, Kentax, are you talking about an enemy aerospace that's parked on the enemy runway?
No, it would... Yeah. So if there's an enemy aerospace and they're parked on their own runway.
I thought you're like, okay, there's a friendly AFK aerospace. Do you shoot it? What are you talking about? No, if there's an enemy aerospace that's parked on the runway, dive at your own risk, because now base turrets are super buff, and there's very few maps without base turrets. They fixed Ring of Fire, thank God. There's some planes that have really long range weaponry. I'm thinking of the light Gauss Corsair. Maybe if they're just landed for repairs and you want to get a snib, you could swing in, get that one snib, and pull off before the base lasers evaporate you.
I've seen other people do it with. So I've seen somebody do it with cluster bombs from high elevation. But it only works
when... Is
the
cluster bomb range 1K, or is it greater? Because I know with light Gauss you can do 1250, and if cluster bombs are 1K, then you've got to technically get closer for that.
No, because you don't have to fully nose down for cluster bombs.
So you could just do a quick little bloop and dive out.
But also there really are not that many maps where you can fly over a base with impunity.
Yeah, there's I know the inner sphere base on Frostbite. If you attack it from the right, left, or back instead of coming at it from the front, you can successfully bomb the runway without your bombs being shot down by base lasers.
But
Still
will
spending
you
a
survive
long
the
time
engagement
getting
with the
there.
lasers?
And you will probably still get hit by the base turrets on your way or out at least a little bit.
Additionally, there was this time, and I think it was the last time I went on a really mad rampage, which I haven't done that since then. It's been years. But Sanchito Escobar, he was in a solitaire on Ivory Towers and was machine gunning my Sula that was on the runway.
Wait.
Oh, you want to hear some real salt? Real salt is when you dunk on some player who shan't be named, but has to do with the apex of something balancing. And they take their Uller Charlie and they run it across the entire map on Mirage to sit inside your aerospace hangar waiting for you to land your plane to try and get back at you. And instead you just ask one of your friendlies to walk up there and dunk on him.
Yes, that's it.
And then they do it again!
Just let them sit there and for these type. Whenever I hear people talk about like, oh, somebody parking a tank on an enemy team's runway, it's like it takes you like 10 minutes to do this. It's not like you can just. It's not like you can just effortlessly put yourself in the enemy or like hangar. Either you're going to get killed by base turrets, or you take a really, really, really long roundabout way to get there, where you don't take damage, or at least enough to significantly hinder you.
Yeah,
so
a good
any friendly.
Yeah.
No, any friendly spawn that spawns at the base, which is always next to the runway, can just come by and sweep it up. But it's whenever you see that, it's a profound testament to Salt.
Yeah,
if you see a friendly doing that, be like, okay, man, you need to log off and just take a breather. You're not in the right headspace.
Yeah, another good point about it is that is to remember that despite how frustrating it is to get the bomber that you worked so hard to buy completely annihilated by some jerk's Epona that's parked on your runway, or just be denied an ability to rearm, just know that they are doing their team a disservice, more so than whatever frustration is happening to you.
Yeah, you can just buy something else, and they will be useless, sitting trapped by base turrets and all of your spawns constantly.
Also, I know
you could just do loop-de-loop and wait for your teammates to help out.
I know
Asking
I already
for teammate help
apologized for killing Sanchito Escobar, team killing him that one time years ago, but I'm still sorry. I'm sorry I killed you. I shouldn't have done that.
About killing other planes on airfield, I think from flight sims it was unspoken rule to not engage any aircraft that is currently landing or taking off or sitting on an airfield. While this game is not a flight sim, I think it's very dishonorable for any pilot to engage another aircraft that is just landed, for example.
But you would shoot a powered down mech on a rep pad.
Yeah, but you wouldn't. To put it in a different context, you wouldn't go into the enemy's main hangar and shoot them while they're trying to repair in their main hangar, would you?
Says you.
But if you had a shot into their main hangar from 900 meters, would you?
If it is a positive ticket trade, because usually there are very few maps where you can actually do that. But like if sometimes there's like, okay, this like Fafnir needs to die because it's like 2 HP left. I'm gonna go run in. I'm going to go into their main hangar and then instantly get yeeted. But if I can get the positive ticket trade, it's okay. Like that is something I will absolutely do, and I will not begrudge anyone for doing that.
In the case, the situation or opportunity is so rare that versus flight sims, I bet there's people landing and repairing a lot more often than in Living Legends. Maybe not, unfortunately, but the opportunity is rare enough that it's not something too frowned upon, like compared to legging, where the opportunity is always there, ever present, and it's always and only used as a tool of spite, more or less.
Disagree.
If you are flying around and about to land on a runway, I will still shoot at you. If you are in the process of landing, I will still shoot at you. If only when you've come to a complete stop will I not shoot at you, but that's just me. I'm not expecting other people to obey that rule, not at this point. I really did try to make it a rule that. Because
I remember
was,
that, yeah.
Yeah, but I was so frustrated with getting bombed on the runway repeatedly. It was happening pretty commonly to me. I was getting bombed on the runway, shot by light Gauss. This was before the turrets were changed, and I was getting doggedly pursued by some of the same players over and over again. It was really frustrating. Like I had no option other than
I think
to just
that was
die.
just one player pulling your leg, because I've never had that happen.
Yeah.
Except for a couple salt people, the one person running their Uller to the other side of the map. I've never been bombed on a runway.
Yeah, it's
whenever I
happened to
see
me a
stuff
few
like
times.
The thing is, like, again, it's even before like turrets became super Omega buff, they were pretty good at killing airspace. Like, also takeoff and landing is like not super like hard in this game. Like, I know it is in flight sims, like it's a really complicated process and requires a lot of setup. Like in this game, you can land the Star basically installing over the runway and you're fine. You'll just be insulated against damage unless you're desynced and your tail falls to the floor in a Visigoth, but we don't talk about that. But that happens to everybody.
I know we finished talking about friendly fire a while ago, but I'd just like to say that if somebody shoots you, 99% of the time, if it's a combat situation or they could possibly be shooting at enemies, they were. And it was an accidental friendly fire.
Yeah, for sure.
Or friendly, or they're trying to smack a battle armor that you never saw. I was on Death Valley one time in the Needles Blood Asp, and I was laying down fire and doing my thing, taking out a Morrigu from 1,149 meters away. And some dumb Warhammer Prime walks in front of me and has the gall to look and be like, "Bro, why'd you shoot at me walking through your line of fire?" And he alphas me in the face. I'm like, "Come on, man."
About ISF's not hard to land in this game. Well,
there are stupid things, but it's less of a process.
No, sure, they are very easy to land nowadays. But back then, you had to maintain certain angle of attack to land Corsair, for example.
I
wouldn't mind aerospace being changed to be like more technically difficult in some senses like that. That'd be fun to like raise the skill floor.
That is already a
This game doesn't need that.
I don't think so. Think of it this way: when there's like maybe like 20 people who can actually use aerospace without crashing repeatedly and not like instantly throwing away their tickets, I feel like you don't need to make it even harder.
Aerospace.
I feel like the number's less than 20, Direwolf.
Okay, before we get into that sort of conversation, we might just want to do that next time because I'm actually late for my next meeting. So, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Direwolf. Thank you, Dead Salmon. Thank you, Koume. Thank you, Architect. I'd also like to give a shout out to Shivoxy for our outro music and Timothy Seals for our intro music. This has been Returning to Base, and I hope you listen in next time.
Have a good night, fellas.
Thanks for hosting, Kentax.
Yeah, pretty.
Bye.